court adjourns hearing of PDP, Action People's Party and Labour Party petitions. South's senators advised Tinubu against zoning Senate presidency to South-South. Supreme Court fixes May 9th for judgment of Ogun gubernatorial poll dispute. Also coming up on Politics HQ, airstrike continues in Sudan despite truce talks in Saudi Arabia. I will not obey court orders, says Senegal opposition leader. Tonight in Politics HQ, we will be discussing the order given by the Code of Conduct Bureau to the president-elect, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, his vice president Kashim Shettima, and 28 governors-elect to declare their assets before May the 29th. We will also look at the Presidential Election Tribunal, which resumed today, its postponement and other issues surrounding it. My guests tonight are Dr. Adetunji Ogunyemi, Associate Professor, Obafemi Awolowo University in Osun State. I also have Kolawole, Deputy Director of the Social Rights and Accountability Project, SERA. Stay with us on Politics HQ. We will be right back. The declaration of assets is a tradition that is expected of Nigerian political office holders. A lot of attention has been paid to it in the past, but not much has been heard from the cases that saw politicians contravene the standing rules of the Code of Conduct Bureau. As Nigeria prepares to swear in the next president and vice president, the Code of Conduct Tribunal has demanded the declaration of assets, sparking new debates around the importance of assets declaration and what it aims to achieve. Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, a former Lagos State governor and one of Nigeria's strongest politicians, is on the verge of his presidential inauguration. And with a history steeped in material wealth and opulence, Nigerians more than ever are waiting to know what the president-elect has in possession. Now, joining me to discuss this tonight, I have Dr. Adetunji Ogunyemi, Associate Professor of Obafemi Awolowo University, and Kolawole, the Deputy Director of SERAP. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you both.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I'd like to start with Dr. Ogunyemi. Why is assets declaration such an important requirement for public officers, and what are the consequences of failing to comply with it? Because you have the Code of Conduct Bureau saying, look, no asset declaration, no inauguration. Do they have that power?
Of course, the Code of Conduct Bureau and the Code of Conduct Tribunal are creations not only of statutes, that is, the acts of the National Assembly of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, but also creations of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1999 as altered. In fact, specifically, in the third schedule to the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1999 as altered, the Code of Conduct is slated as number one federal executive body, number one in the third schedule. And in the fifth schedule, there are 14 codes, 14 laws. I mean, if you say it in the usual parlance, 14 laws that must be complied with. And one of those laws for public officers in Nigeria, including lecturers in universities, is that they must declare their assets whenever they seek to ascend into any political office or in any senior public office in any part of the federation. They must subscribe to the oath first of allegiance to the Nigerian nation if they are political office holders, and second, must declare their assets. And this is provided in the fifth schedule to the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. But specifically, it is also found in the Code of Conduct Bureau and Tribunal Act, which is an act of the National Assembly.
Thank you, Dr. Ogunyemi. Now, Kola, can you explain in more detail what information is required on this assets declaration form and how the Code of Conduct Bureau verifies the accuracy of the information provided. Hello, caller, are you there? Can you hear me?
No, I didn't get you the first time.
Okay, I'll repeat the question. My question is, can you explain in more detail what information is required on the assets declaration form and how the Code of Conduct Bureau verifies the accuracy of the information?
Thank you very much, Gbenga. The Code of Conduct Bureau is not only statutorily empowered to have custody of the asset declaration forms, they are also statutorily empowered to verify the contents of those forms, of course, and that is done by way of investigation, deploying the various tools that the average public institution or law enforcement agency will use in that regard. And the aim is to verify, not to reach, that is, to ascertain the truthfulness or the veracity, if you call it that, of the contents of those forms, knowing that they are a very good part of the accountability mechanisms in government. And they also have the powers to prosecute anyone who is found wanting in that circumstance, at least following up on their investigations. And that includes that perhaps on the declaration, over declaration, because that is also done. And they have the powers to prosecute such individuals. So the CCB is not only important to take custody of those asset declaration forms, but to take those steps to verify and prosecute. And a very important part of the aspect of the functions of the CCB is also in taking custody of those forms to make them available to Nigerian citizens on such terms as the National Assembly deep feet in the laws that they passed, which brings us to the issue of Freedom of Information Act. And you would agree with me naturally that if citizens have access to those forms, a part of the mechanism, the major mechanism of the asset declaration forms will be met, because it means that people can own that part of fighting corruption, making their leaders accountable, because again, it would mean that the bulk of the work is not resting on the CCB alone. Nigerian citizens can also play their part. It would also enhance the whistleblower protection, whistleblower policy, for instance, for people who have one or two informations about public officers who might be corrupt or who might have made on that declaration or that declaration.
Now, caller, permit me to interrupt you for a second there. You did mention something that struck me. You talked about the FOI and the CCB. In January of 2020, your organization, SERAP, found such a request you wanted the president and his vice president and other 36 state governors and the deputies, urging them to provide details of their assets declared to the CCB. How did that pan out?
The matter is still in court as we speak. We have written to the president, that's President Muhammadu Buhari, and his vice president, and to also all the governors in Nigeria and their deputy governors to provide details of the asset declaration forms. Because ordinarily, before they submitted the form to the CCB, naturally the forms are with them. They are aware of the content of those forms. And we've simply told them to perform a major part of their civic duty to make those forms, that is the version that is submitted to the CCB, available to members of the public, in keeping with the provisions of the Constitution, particularly the Freedom of Information Act. Now, the matter is still pending in court. But interestingly, one of those respondents in that suit, specifically the Deputy Governor of Kebbi State, really sent us a copy of his forms. That was subsequent to the suit that had been filed while the matter was pending in court. And naturally, that satisfies the requirement and the questions we passed. And the aim is to continue the suit against him as it were. And that means that nothing stops the president and vice president, other public officers from following suit in that regard.
Thank you very much, caller. Now, Dr. Ogunyemi, when these public officials declare their assets and when you have a situation where there's a freedom of information request, how do you balance, declaring your assets, the transparency involved, and you trying to, be above corruption and all the benefits of it, and also maintain your privacy as an individual, because you don't want your address and all your personal details out there just because you're a public official?
No public official should be heard to complain that he does not want to lay there, even at the risk of public advertisement and publication of his assets, those assets that he has acquired before office, and those assets that he has also acquired while leaving office. I mean, no public official should be afraid of the public, particularly public knowledge of what he has and what he does not have. That's settled. But the requirements of the law does not compel. There's no compulsion in the law, in the CCB law, I dare call it act, that those declarations should be made public. There's none. It is that they must declare their assets, fill the appropriate form, and submit to the Code of Conduct Bureau. Full stop. If they go beyond the call of duty to make it public, oh, that's good. It helps the accountability and transparency requirements under the rule of morality, if you dare say that. But there's no legal requirement for that. In fact, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, when he came in, I think 2015, and his vice actually declared their assets publicly. But no law compels them that they do so publicly. Ditto for lecturers in universities who are also declaring their assets. In fact, if a person is to become the dean of a faculty, he must declare his assets before he ascends to that office, because it's a new office anyway. And when he leaves, he must also declare his assets. But no law makes it compulsory for him to make it public. Publicly declaring assets may be an addition to our own type of transparency and democratic practices, but no law compels it. It must be taken. We must show this very clearly, so that we do not ginger the Nigerian public interest unnecessarily, and do not make the president to show that the president or the vice president or the deputy governors or any officer of the public of the Federation of Nigeria, including legislators at the national and state level, to feel guilty for not publishing the assets. The Freedom of Information Act may empower, and it has actually empowered every Nigerian to request for information. Yes, and that information may be to file a letter, a memo to the Code of Conduct Bureau requesting for information in respect of ABC, including any public officer. Yes, but the Code of Conduct is not duty-bound to release it. It's not duty-bound. The only thing is that the Freedom of Information Act, which we have 2011, as created institution where Nigerians may follow certain conditions. There are conditions attached to the Freedom of Information Act. For example, no one should dare begin to ask for the status of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, because it is within the prohibited realm of that, which says it is an action between a professional and his clients. The medical doctor may not want the medical doctor of the president may not want the information, and the law protects him. Freedom of Information Act protects a lawyer and his client, and information given in transactions in confidence to them may not be divulged. Ditto for a journalist who has secured a high-level information that he may wish to know. He may hide under the I don't want to declare my source, and the law protects the same journalist. So the Freedom of Information Act really does not cancel the Official Secrets Act. No, it does not. I've read it cover to cover, and I know for sure that what it says is that when you need an information, you file for request. You request for it. And if it is not within the prohibited level of information that you can have for public consumption, you get it. And if you think and you believe that it is the CCB or any other organization of government is denying you that information, then you sue that organization. You sue it to court, and then request that the head of the organization be committed to prison for refusing to release the information, which will be within public domain. And so many information with respect to public officers in Nigeria are not within the public domain, especially the one dealing with Nigerian security.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ogunyemi. Kola, I saw you were listening and smiling at Dr. Ogunyemi's submission. Sarah has filed a couple of FOI requests. Would you want to contribute and add to what he just said now?
Yes, thank you very much, Gbenga. The position on the law on this is very clear. While we understand the fundamental rights of every Nigerian, including lawyers and non-lawyers, to hold contrary views in our interpretation of the law. But law as is clear, and features of the Constitution is very clear. As to the rules of the CC, The CCB is to take custody of asset declaration form and make it available. I am quoting the fifth schedule of the Constitution presently, to make it available to all Nigerians on terms as to any act of the National Assembly as the National Assembly deemed fit. Now, keeping in mind that the Constitution was drafted or came into force in 1999, and the Freedom of Information Act was made in 2011. Is the Freedom of Information Act not an act of the National Assembly? Does it not pertain to public information? Does it not pertain to public institutions? So which other law is the CCB waiting for to be passed by the National Assembly that would make asset declaration forms available to members of the public? And I dare say the meaning of public institutions, information, is very clear in the Freedom of Information Act that it covers the field, including asset declaration forms. And that has been the bulk of our argument in our advocacy and out to ensure that the Code of Conduct Tribunal does not only take custody of those forms, verify the contents of those forms, but also to make them available to Nigerians pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act. That has clearly in its wordings overruled the provisions of the Official Secret Act and other acts that are in their nature itself against the freedom of expression, which, as we know, is constitutionally guaranteed in Section 39. I'm not even talking of Article 9 of the African Charter that Nigeria has ratified. Yes, public institutions, public officers on their own may have no legal basis to make those forms available. But since they are public documents, since a part of that, a copy has been submitted to the CCB, then we can request that for them. But the CCB is the public institution that has the statutory powers to hold this information. And I see no reason why the Freedom of Information Act cannot apply to make Nigerians have access to those forms. So the question is, which classes of information does the Freedom of Information Act apply to that exempts asset declaration forms? Asset declaration forms are not mentioned in the exceptions in the Freedom of Information Act. And talking of the exceptions to the FY Act, it is very clear that the various exceptions listed in the Freedom of Information Act also has provisions that counterbalance to ensure that ultimately it is the court that determines whether information being sought falls within the context of the exemptions. And the court can make orders pursuant to that, either release part of that information or do not release a part of that information. And the basic rule that runs through the length and breadth of the Freedom of Information Act, particularly guiding the actions of the court, is public interest. And that resonates throughout the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act. That is the court. In the duty of the court as arbiters between an applicant for information and a public institution, claiming that the information falls within the exceptions, which may include national security or rights, means for the court to look and balance this interest and ultimately determine in the public interest. This is clearly the provisions of Section 22 and Section 24 of the Freedom of Information Act. So even ultimately, the court still has to look at the nature of the request, look at the content of the information, and determine either way whether the information should be released or not, which is one of the very good provisions in the Freedom of Information Act.
Thank you very much, Kola, for that. Now, Dr. Ogunyemi, how does the Code of Conduct Bureau handle cases where an elected official has acquired assets or income through illegitimate means, but may still face public scrutiny or criticism of their wealth? Some say, they're politicians that have all this money, but there's no enterprise. You have a situation where you have wealth and no enterprise. How does the CCB come in this sort of situation?
I'm sorry, you may have to take the question again. There were glitches that prevented me from
I'll repeat myself, Dr. Ogunyemi. Yes. I said, how does the CCB handle cases where an elected official has acquired assets or income through legitimate means, through illegitimate means, and faces public scrutiny or criticism for their wealth? A situation where you have, wealth without enterprise.
It is not within the purview of the CCB to take hypothetical issues. It should go strictly by what is filled in its form. The only thing is that it can go further to ascertain whether what has been filled tallies with the possibility, with the possible income of a person, is possibility of his having owned those assets as at the time he was saying that he owned them, particularly if that person is a public official. Very important. And then take discretion. I mean, the CCB is actually an organization with huge discretion. I like my brother there who said that the CCB has a duty to make the forms available to any Nigerian that may wish to scrutinize it. Yes, that's right. That's what that's what you can use the opportunity of Freedom of Information Act to do that. But he also mentioned, and that's very interesting, and that's where the key is, on those terms and conditions that the National Assembly shall specify. Now, has the National Assembly specified those conditions? The answer is no.
No.
Oh, no, no. So no conditions have been specified. No law has been made to give regulations to the CCB with respect to what conditions will exist before it will allow those the information contained in the forms field to be released to the public. But perchance, let's say, for example, a permanent secretary whose income is less than 800,000 naira in a month, but he declares that he owns 6 hotels in Abuja, Central Business District in Abuja, which hotel, each of them costs nothing less than 2 billion naira. Now, except this officer can establish that he inherited it or that he was gifted, there is no way the CCB will not bring an action against him in the incongruence of his income relative to the assets declared. Okay. And the CCB has a duty, and that has a right to proceed against any public official who is living above his means or who has declared assets and income that are at variance with his possible income, except he can prove to the tribunal, that is the Code of Conduct Tribunal, because the CCB has its own court, and it is called the Code of Conduct Tribunal, except that person can establish before the Code of Conduct Tribunal that he has earned those assets as a result of gift or bequest or what we can call inheritance from anybody whatsoever. If he cannot establish it, then it may be culpable. And
so in that situation, the CCB is duty bound to take action against that public official?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Ogunyemi. Now, caller, before we begin to wrap things up, in the last 5 years, the CCB has turned a blind eye to landmark journalistic revelations like the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, and Pandora Papers, all of which has pointed to likely asset declaration breaches by current and serving public officers. Why is this so? Is the CCB all back and no bite?
Unfortunately, the CCB is a victim of what we've seen in Nigeria over time, which is, you can call it impunity, or you can call it lack of political will to implement our laws. And these have affected nearly every public institution in Nigeria, including law enforcement agencies that have very good acts that set them up that would allow them to do their work. So the first thing you would need to understand about the CCB, beyond the face of the statute that set up the act and the constitutional provisions that outlines it, does it have the capacity to do what it's meant to do? And by capacity, that can mean independence. For instance, how much is the budgetary allocation to the CCB? How much of that is capital? How much of that is recurrent? And now, what about personnel? The ability to verify. And you need to understand the quantum of what we were talking about. The definition of a public officer in the Constitution is so wide that it includes practically any government official that you can think of. And that means that gives you a very good idea of how much the number of forms that would be with CCB every year for that instance, being everybody made every 4 years, and how much they would need to go to verify the content of those forms. And understanding that verification is just like an investigation for any law enforcement agencies. They will need to visit, and sometimes they travel, visit sites and registries, bank, and all that, deploying the mechanism of the law to ascertain the veracity of the forms. They are not equipped to do that, and I know this because we've engaged with the CCB at various levels. They do not have the manpower or the resources to do that, and that also brings up the issue of the digital nature of things. Are those forms in the digital format for them to make verification easy? or are they still in hard copy, which of course makes it very hard. And so those are some of the problems that we have. But above all, the challenge of impunity and lack of political will to enforce our laws is the greatest that we've seen. We have seen individuals on the face of that people have come out to say things of, and there have been aspects of whistleblowing too that mention different individuals for infractions of whether not necessarily declaration, but for assets that do not be explained. And we've not seen the outcome. We've not even seen the onset of any such investigation. How much more the outcome of that?
There's so much to cover on this issue, and of course, the National Assembly still needs to play its part in declaring what's next. When are you compelled to disclose to the public? So quite a lot is still left to be desired from the CCB. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Dr. Adetunji Ogunyemi, Associate Professor at the Obafemi Awolowo University of Osun State, and Kola Wale-Oluwadare, Deputy Director, SERAP. Thanks for joining me on this important conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.